I've had this video on my list forever. Take two. As a cinematographer, it's really important to be able to maintain a style across scenes, across locations, across days, as well as to be able to communicate emotion to an audience. And that's why I think lighting ratios are a really important thing to know and understand as a cinematographer. Now, I've got to be 100% upfront with you. As of maybe a year and a half ago, I started paying attention to my lighting ratios. Prior to that, I didn't really think about it very much. But ever since I've really been paying attention to it and learning about what looks best for certain situations, I've found that I've learned quite a lot, and I feel like my preparation skills in pre-production as well as my communication skills on set have really flourished. Brief intro on lighting ratios. It is the difference between light on one side of your subject to the other side of your subject, or alternatively, the foreground to the background. You can do both. Now, doing a key to fill lighting ratio is a bit easier to kind of show examples, so I'm going to show you some examples here, starting with a 1:1 ratio. That means that there is the same amount of light on either side of the face. Basically, it's flat lighting. It's kind of boring, it's very bland, there's no shadows, but it still is useful. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's totally up to you and the situation you're using it in. Just personally, I don't like it. It's often used in comedy, and the most commonly used example is a sitcom. All the lighting, very even, no real shadows. Now here is 2:1. Now 2:1 means there is a one-stop difference between one side of your subject and the other side. So there is a touch more contrast. It's really not heavily noticeable, but it is there. And here's where I think you can really get away with it. Using that sort of thing for comedy is also acceptable, I think. I feel like it is high-key enough, and you'll hear people talk about high-key and low-key. This is high-key lighting. It's a lot of light, less shadow. But I feel like shooting in a 2:1 lighting ratio is kind of nice anyway. You can still use that and get away with it for comedy, and you still get a little bit more shape in the process instead of just having very flat, very nothing 1:1 ratio. Here is the 4:1 ratio. Now 4:1 ratio is 2 stops difference between one side and the other side. Now this does give a little bit more shape and it does get really nice looking. This is my go-to for when I'm filming people or taking photos of people. It's really nice portraiture lighting. It's very generic, very standard, gives nice shape to the face, but also this and anything upwards of this ratio look really good depending on how much mood, how much shadow you want to bring into it. So let's have a look at the next one. This is 8:1 ratio. So 8:1 ratio means 3 stops difference between one side and the other side. Now, the math there does seem a little bit off. I have seen a lot of people talk about 4 stops difference, not 3 stops difference, but significantly more people are saying it's 3 stops difference. So I'm going to say 3 stops because it kind of seems like it might be somewhere in the middle, and that's why there's a little bit of a confusion. I don't know, somebody can correct me in the comments because I'm kind of new to this sort of thing as well, but still, I think I know enough about it to make a video on it and explain to you what it is. Anyway, 8:1 ratio, a lot more shadow, a lot more contrast, and you can see you're kind of adding drama to the shot. So you can see that choosing the correct ratio is important in maintaining a certain style, and it's important to convey certain emotions, but also if you're maintaining a style over a long period of time, let's say you're doing a long form job, you're doing a feature film, you've got multiple scenes, shot over multiple days, multiple locations, it's a really good idea to know your ratios and try to stick to that per location, per scene, depending on what is needed for those scenes. This becomes especially important if you do have to go back and shoot pickups for certain scenes, and you can start to comprehend where you put those lights and why you put them there to get that certain ratio. So not only stylistically important, but also logistically important. You're going to be able to tell your gaffer with confidence, hey, I want that light there because this is the style we're going for. It's a useful thing to know. Now, when I'm taking measurements, I use a light meter. You don't have to use a light meter. You can use false color. You can really do whatever you want to get the light reading, but I use a light meter because it's just easier for me. I always have it on me as a DP. I know, those outdated things, yeah, I keep one with me. I almost always use a spot meter though. I don't really use an incident meter, but in this case, I did use an incident meter just because, well, I'm the person in the frame. When you're using an incident meter, it is important to remember that it is an orb. It's kind of taking in a lot of reflection from the room. So if you've got multiple light sources in a room, it might be picking up those reflections as well and giving you a reading that is kind of higher than what it should be. So in order to combat that, best thing to do is to still face it slightly towards the camera, obviously, but do turn it a little bit towards whatever light you're trying to measure. And if you do find that you have other light sources interfering, just cupping over wherever the incident meter is being hit with that light that'll cut it out. Just don't do it too much, obviously, because then you'll still get an incorrect reading. But if you cup it over just enough to get rid of that little bit of light that's hitting it, you'll be able to get a more accurate reading. Ratios don't stop there though. As I said before, you can do foreground to background as well. And this is where things get really creative and you can really play it up. You can have a darker foreground and a lighter background, or you can have the complete opposite. You can have a darker background and a lighter foreground. Up to you. And it really does help in creating separation in your shot. Best thing to do is to work out where those light sources are coming from as well. If you can position it in such a way that you have the light key side of your subject on one side and then darkness behind that, and then on the opposite side, on the dark side, you have a splash of light behind that, that could really shape your subject really nicely. And this is a thing that I do typically when I'm trying to do interviews or things like that. I try to find things in the room that create a little bit of depth and contrast compared to my foreground lighting. Another go-to setup that I like to do to keep my shots looking natural is underexposing the foreground just a little bit compared to the background. It really does just make things look natural and not lit. And I learned that kind of over time. I just kind of played with it a bit and really paid attention to those ratios in order to work out what works best for me. And no, that doesn't work in every single circumstance, but it is still a nice go-to setup that makes my lighting look natural. And if I didn't play with lighting ratios, I wouldn't know that that was kind of a style that I wanted to lean towards. So that's a bonus of playing around with cinematography in my spare time. So knowing a lighting ratio is good for conveying emotion. It's also good for being able to communicate to your crew. That is the key thing here. Communication is key, and being able to definitively say where you want something and why you want it there. Lighting ratios help with that. Alright, link of the week this week is two friends who are doing a project right now, are looking for donations. I'm going to leave a link down below so you can go check out their project, because it's a really cool one. It's called Wicked Women. Wicked Women is about two women who started up the first lesbian erotica magazine in Australia, and basically their love story. It's going to be really cool. It's a really cool story as well if you want to read up on it. So go support my friends. I'll leave a link down below. But I hope you enjoyed learning about lighting ratios. I think they're a really important tool, and maybe you can use it on your next project. If you have any ideas for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment down below. I do like hearing and getting new ideas and popping them on a list. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.